to the Energy in Motion podcast, exploring what makes us move, what makes us thrive, what makes us happy, what keeps us alive. I'm Suzy Rowland, a mother, writer, poet and founder of the Happy in School project. As humans, we are emotional beings, literally energy in motion, which each of us express uniquely. Our energies influence everything in our lives. Join me in conversation with an eclectic range of guests using their energies to powerful effect. Tune in for the first series of Energy in Motion podcast. You'll find the Energy in Motion podcast on your favourite digital download channels. I can't wait for you to tune in and relax and enjoy the sound of Energy in Motion. Hi Beth, Beth Gibson MBE, congratulations.
Thank you so much, Suzy.
You're very welcome. Very welcome. Did you go to the palace? How did that go, if you did go?
I've not been yet. It's some point in the next 6 months. I'm just waiting to hear from them, yeah.
Yes, yeah, how exciting. I mean, that's just a really lifetime achievement, really. And obviously, you've been a teacher for a long, long time and things have changed. That just shows me that, you know, you're passionate and your passion and expertise has been noticed. You've been a teacher in mainstream schools for nearly 20 years. And I appreciate from my experience, I've got 3 teachers in the family and many from, you know, a long time ago. And I know it's a challenging career. But could you share with me a highlight, that moment when you say, aha, that's why I became a teacher, or that's why I've stayed in education?
Yeah, so there's been quite a few throughout my career, but I think the one that really stands out is I got tagged in a post when I used to be on Twitter, or X as it is, by an ex-student who had become a primary school teacher. And she tagged me because she got this photograph of a folder that she'd had from her school days. And on it was a post-it note that I'd put on her folder one day in class when she was having a really rough day. And the post-it note just said, "You've got this," with a smiley face. And she'd kept that post-it note and she'd actually sellotaped it onto her folder. And she said that I was the reason why she'd actually gone as far as she had and become a primary school teacher. And that for me, that really, really simple, completely, you know, that was just one moment in my day that I don't even think I thought about afterwards, but it meant so much to her as an individual.
That is a very moving story. And I think, as you say, it doesn't have to be the big things, does it? It's just that small piece of appreciation that just travelled with that young person all the way through their career. So if you were going to give a piece of advice, just one piece of advice to an early careers teacher or a newly qualified teacher, what would it be?
It would be remain the sense of humanity that you have. Keep your human sensibility about you. You don't have to. There is an element when you are a teacher of being an actor, and you are, in a sense, you walk into that room and you become a persona that's different to you, that's bigger than you, that's outside of your life, because you leave your life at the door in some respect when you go to work. But remaining that little bit of humanity and keeping that with you. And, you know, it's really important that we separate our job from our life and keep that boundary intact. But sometimes showing them that you are a human and allowing them the space to show you who they are as well.
This is a big one for me. Are you concerned by the lack of young men coming into education, apart from maybe those who opt to go for being PE teachers or tech and, you know, sort of computing type roles, or external coaches or football coaches, etc. But those people, young men opting post university to train to be a teacher, like, where are they?
I think it's a real concern. I think that there is a lack of enthusiasm for it to be a primary career. There are, you know, it's seen as there are better ways, wrongly, that there are better ways or different ways in order to have a career, to be successful, to earn often salaries in excess of what you can for a teacher. And for men in particular, it's almost seen as a backup career now. I'm going to do XYZ. And if that doesn't work out, well, then I'll become a teacher. Even in PE specialisms and backgrounds now, the opportunities that they foresee in terms of being a personal trainer or going down that route. And actually, if that doesn't work out for them, then maybe I'll become a PE teacher. And even then, well, I'll get my PE qualification, and then potentially I'll look to go and work abroad in Dubai, because
Yes.
they're seeing through the media and through social media as a more kind of glamorous way of living. And I think the same occurs in tech. You can't recruit in certain specialisms, particularly in men, with engineering, with computing science, because the amount of money they can earn in private areas and private business is way outstrips what in being a teacher. And the press around being a teacher as well is quite heavily negative. Why would you want to enter that career when you're just out
Yeah.
of university?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know there was a good advertising campaign that the DfE ran a few years back, which I thought was really good and very, inspiring. And it had, it showed the fun aspects and, children being provocative and entertaining. And they did have some males featured in that advert. But I think it is such a pity because I think we've lost the dynamic of what it is to be part of society. Because if a school is part of our society in a microcosm, then the men don't exist in the outside world. And I think, some of the issues we've got, and I don't want us to get sidetracked onto those, but, issues around behavior, about treatment of women, and different and lack of respect for women and girls, and how women are perceived in their roles, when they leave school and go and get a job, and how the males generally tend to earn more than women. I think that a lot of those things could be corrected if we attracted good quality young men to just redress the balance and just show the different side of life. And I think for me personally, that's a big issue. If I were Prime Minister tomorrow, or even sort of Education Secretary, I'd want to examine that because I think it's not working for me. And even small anecdote, I was working with a teenage girl who wasn't actually able to go to school. She was autistic, and it's part of the research I did for my book. I can't go to school, and she explained really clearly that it was because she was put as a sensible one between three or four boys who were known to be more boisterous, louder, just being Mickey taking. So she was there, and her role was, as assigned by a teacher, to calm them down and get them to be on task during the lesson. And now she was very bright, very intelligent, and she felt that in being given that role, she was missing some of her own teaching and her own development as a young woman, and she was ambitious. And I thought, so she stopped going, which I thought was a real shame. I'm not sort of trying to apportion blame for that teacher. I think in difficult circumstances, you try to apply a range of techniques and tools to get people in, and that was a helpful technique for some of the boys. But in the end, she was the sacrifice, unfortunately. And I just think that yeah, let's think about that as a society, but that's not for you today, Beth.
No, there is something in there, isn't there? I mean, I think children need to see a wide range of people doing the same job. It's a little bit like, moving away from the idea that a doctor is a man and a nurse is a woman. We need to see teachers as both men and women.
Yes.
I didn't pick my own children's school, primary school, because there were male teachers there, but I'm very lucky in the fact there are male my children's primary school, and I think that's a positive of that particular school. They actually have more than one, but we can't necessarily as well say that male teachers are needed for the boys in the school, because actually girls respond
Yes.
to male teachers. And whenever we've done work around them having go-to members of staff, it's surprising how many girls will pick a male member of staff as someone that they trust, because
Yes.
they have a positive relationship with their father or their grandfather, and they see that through a male member of staff. A little bit, in the same way that boys sometimes look at female members of staff as reflective and compassionate. So I think it's important to have those male representatives, as you said, to represent what we see in society.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, just coming into your current role at the moment of head of attendance and inclusive pathways, have you noticed any commonalities in the groups of children who struggle with attendance? Are they coming from particular sections? I know that Birmingham is a diverse, multiracial, multi-faith area. Parts of Birmingham are for sure, and I think your school is in Nuneaton.
Yeah, just outside of, yeah.
Yeah, but in terms of the cohorts who are most vulnerable to exclusion, what have you found in your school and also historically maybe in other roles?
I'd like to say that it's an easy and you can spot a pattern, but I genuinely don't believe that you can. I think that there are pockets in all areas and all ranges. I think that it's important that children are seen on an individual case by case basis and scenario. And often the causes are complex and there are multiple layers to each child. And it's not as simple as saying that child has X or that has happened to that child. When you start to unpick it, the story is like an onion or it's like a book. There are different layers to it, and you can't, we talk a lot about, we've lost that sense of belonging and children feeling like they belong in school, but the reasons for that are really complex and multifaceted. And I think that there are areas where we're seeing that services have kind of left an area in terms of there might be reduced use services, or we're seeing less police presence, and that has an impact. Or where we see, we've had scenarios where we've seen cases where one child on a street doesn't attend school, so that has a knock-on effect on the whole road because other children see that and see that commonality. So mapping where children are is useful, and it's a good starting point along with looking at data. But then it's always important to come back to the individual child within that as well, and kind of try and understand the child's voice is so key in all of these cases. Getting the child's voice, getting the voice of the family, and then building around that is always the important part.
I mean, the work that I did for my book, the research, um, was based on, like many books, a lot of experiences that I had had around my son's neurodivergence. And I know there is a fairly large cohort of young people who struggle with attendance because of sensory issues and as well as learning and cognitive differences. But I also recognized, as you say, that these things can be multi-layered. So you might say, another reason for children struggling to attend is poverty, for example. And then you might find more within that poverty, we've got other issues as well within the family, around DV, or we might have language difficulties or undiagnosed parents, or a whole range of things. And would you say it's fair to say that if you look at one problem, you might find many others within that? So in a way, it's always worth, if you have an inkling or there is an issue with a particular issue attending and you can see one issue, to maybe do further investigation.
The earlier you intervene, the more successful it will be. And there are pointers. So, for example, if a child is a young carer, that will often be a pointer that there may be potentially down the line some attendance issues that are, that are beyond their control to some extent. So it's worth having those groups, those vulnerable children always in mind and looking out for wherever there is a slight decline. But the earlier that you spot a pattern or a trend or something that doesn't fit right or that has changed in that individual, the more successful you will be with supporting that case and that child.
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the questions that I've kind of played with is the concept of school being where children need to be for their safety. However, some of the feedback I had for my book research was around children who are bullied in school, or children find the school environment just too it's kind of almost like tribal. And if you're not in the right group and you're not wearing the right clothes and you don't go to the right, don't have the right, live in the right part of the city, you're not going to fit in. And I just wonder how children navigate things like that, because if they are getting into school and they tick the attendance box, but actually being in school is difficult to navigate. How can we fix that?
There's a difference, isn't there, between attending and thriving? And I think, you can attend and be existing and not necessarily thriving in your environment. Or, the flip side of that is that for some children, school is absolutely their safe space. If they're in a domestic violence situation or there is acute poverty at home, and that's their hot meal for the day, or that's where somebody opens the door with a smile and welcomes them through that door, that is absolutely their safe space. And they are thriving, even if they may struggle to attend. So we've got two really complex different sides of that coin, where actually if you've got a child that is coming through the door and is going through the motions but isn't necessarily feeling that human connection, isn't feeling that they belong in that space, that's about the culture that we create within our school. How many so it goes back to those micro interactions that I talked about right at the beginning. How many micro interactions do we have with children on a daily basis? How many times do we acknowledge them? Do we smile at them? Do we say good morning to them? Do we remember little things around them? You'll be amazed how much it means to a child when you remember what they said they were doing over the weekend on Friday, and you remember that on the Tuesday of the next week and you ask them about it, or that they watch a program on TV that you also watch, so while they're standing in the lunch queue you ask them if they watched it. Like that means so much to them because they feel seen then.
Yeah.
The difference between a child walking through the door and just existing and ticking the box for attendance, and a child walking through the door and feeling that they belong in that space and that they occupy a place in that school. And that's about the culture that we create that underpins the attendance.
I love that answer, because that's also that speaks to me about the well-being of the staff. Because if they are able to remember that and engage that and smile at that young person and show them that human interaction, that human contact, I mean, that travels for a long, long way. But if the culture isn't, as you say, that kind of nurturing environment, then the teacher's already drained, that the child becomes noise rather than an individual. So I think that's something to really think about, that teacher well-being and that whole school environment and how you build that across the teams. I think that's really important. So slightly different side of this conversation is, do you think that issuing parents with penalty notices is an effective attendance policy or strategy?
I think that, and again, it's a really tricky one, isn't it? I think that, there are two types of penalty notices, and there are the fixed penalty notices for leave of absence, for being away from school during term time, or potentially a holiday, for example.
Holiday, yeah, yeah.
And, I get why people do it. I totally, utterly understand why people do it. When you can save vast amounts of money on your holiday, and the fine, is worth it, in those cases for many families from both ends of the spectrum, from your wealthy families who are willing to pay the fine because it's a fraction of the cost of their holiday, to your disadvantaged families where the reason they're going in that term time is because that is the only way they can afford a holiday.
Good holiday, yeah.
And that scenario. And I don't think that there is anything that schools, local authorities do in those scenarios that will change that unless the holiday companies change. So unless the holiday companies change and there is very little that we can do. I don't think it's fair that centre parks, charge 4 times as much for a half-term holiday as they do the week before, and teachers are hit by that as well. Teachers take their holidays in those times, and they feel it too. And schools don't see that money. Schools don't get anything out of the fines. It is done by the local authority, but actually the money from those fines goes to support schools with attendance and with school issues. So it's a really hard one. And the other type of fine is the fine where parents aren't sending their children to school.
Yes.
And again, there are complex cases there, but I think for some families where there is a complete and utter lack of engagement, where the schools have gone above and beyond and done absolutely everything that they can do, but families just don't see the importance of education and don't have that ambition and that drive for their children to attend school. It is sometimes necessary because it is the only way to get parents in some respects to start to engage with that process. Do I think that it necessarily changes the outcome? No. In some cases it does, and I have seen it have an impact in some cases, but do I think it changes the outcome in other cases? No. But do we need to do something? Because there is an onus on parents at some point that their child has to receive an education, and that doesn't have to be in school. If a parent chooses to educate otherwise than at school, then that's their choice as a parent. But where you are just not making an effort to send a child to school because you've prioritized other aspects of your own life, or because it's easier for you, then that's not fair on your child. As parents, we should all innately want better for our children, and I think 99% of the population do. I think we all want our children to have better lives than we did, to have more opportunities than we did. And from my own personal experience, I know that is why I was successful, because that's what my dad wanted for me, because he hadn't had that opportunity, and he recognized that was the way I was going to get it. He pushed me through school because he knew that I was going to get the opportunity that he hadn't had because of the circumstances that he had come from. And I'm eternally grateful to him, because I know where he came from. And where children don't necessarily have that at home, schools have to do that sometimes for them. They have to advocate for that child and understand that child deserves that future and deserves that opportunity. So I don't think it's a straightforward yes or no answer. I think there are complexities within that.
It is a nuanced situation. And I think when you mentioned about EOTAS education other than at school, I think maybe it's almost like we need to have a national conversation about these things. Certainly since the pandemic, and if you do want to do it your own way, and there are lots of parents that I hear say, well, I wanted, why can't we do homeschool? And I think it's just to that clarity. What does that look like? What does that mean? Where do you get the resources? How can you benchmark your child's learning? Are you able to access registered and qualified professionals? Is your child going to be safe if you leave them go to work? It's just about thinking it through and also being supported in that. So I think there are and I've met families and I think that kid is thriving.
Yeah.
not being in school. And I've seen some who once they're back into school, maybe a different school, wow, again, magic happens. So I think rather than this whole kind of two-pronged debate, it would really make sense if there was kind of more nuanced conversation about it. And the thing that really kind of I find very difficult working in education is the fact that we do tend to get into you either wear that hat or you wear this hat. And it seems that there seems to be such a small amount of people who want to talk in nuance and shades that we all get lost and everyone gets very shouty. And then I mean I don't use X Twitter anymore for that very reason, because the conversations became abusive and shouty and not really very progressive, not much listening to another alternative opinion. So but yeah, I understand it's not a straightforward yes or no, and thank you for
No,
answering that, you know.
I I agree with you on that. I agree with you definitely. I came off X on Twitter for the same reason, but there is a national conversation around what does you know elect home education look like, because we need to. Again, I have seen it done really well. I've seen families that do it really successfully, but there is a huge commitment in that, isn't there? There is a time commitment, there is a financial commitment in that, because a lot of what is out there in the home education world costs quite significant amounts of money, and for lots of families that is outside of their reach. So again, if we're not careful within that world, we are creating a tiered system. uh,
Yeah,
we are creating a have and a have not system. If we're going to have families that are going to do that, then is there a conversation around examination centres where children can access the examinations at that point for
yeah.
schooling? Because at the moment it's, well, you've got to go and beg to a school that might allow you to use their.
Exactly, their centre. And I also heard recently that a child wasn't quote allowed to take an exam early. They were very gifted at maths, but weren't allowed to sit a GCSE because they were too young. So they were struggling to find somewhere for the child to take the exam. So all these are really valid challenges. And I think, if we're going to sort of, in a way, democratize education, we've got kind of a government funded education system over here that a percentage of children go to, and then a system that's more individualized, if you like, and that includes home education. Let's just talk about how these things work, how easy it is to swap between the two, how the child's voice can be heard in that process. I just think it'd be really good to talk about this stuff rather than, throw stones to each other.
Yeah. And on that point as well, let's not devalue the teacher in that. So let's not throw
Yeah,
the stone at the teacher and say this is a better version than a school. This is, it's a different version than a school. But there is still value in expertise and in teaching and in that profession. And actually, maybe we need to look at the value of the teaching profession again and say, how much value do we place on that as a society?
yes.
Whatever role that is, however that is delivered, let's not devalue that as a profession, within whatever system that looks like.
And that goes back to how we attract men into teaching, because clearly, if they're thinking that, the value is monetary value and also esteem. So, but it doesn't seem as if young men are finding monetary value or esteem in the teaching profession. So, yeah, let's talk about how we can re invigorate the value of teaching and teachers, because, as you say, it's an important role. So what practically do you suggest that parents can do if their child is struggling with school anxiety?
I think the sooner you open that conversation with the school, the better. A lot of parents, through either wanting to protect their child or not wanting to, the fear of vocalizing it and the fear of putting it out there sometimes is a barrier to actually saying, do you know what, maybe there is a conversation to be had here, maybe there is a problem here or an issue here. And again, it comes back to the earlier that is picked up and dealt with from both sides, the better. And it's always, always, always about partnership and how to work with each other. And you don't necessarily have to have the same point of view or agree on everything, because that's not human nature. That's not how we work as a society. But find that common ground, and the common ground should be the child, and the best needs of that child, and what is workable, what is manageable. But the earlier that conversation takes place, the more effective it can be, the more powerful it can be. And I just after COVID worked with an absolutely amazing family who, it was my first family after COVID of dealing with anxiety-based school non-attendance, and the mom was absolutely incredible in the fact that the updates that she would give me and the conversations that we would have, and she would always refer to me as Mrs. and say, whatever you want to do, Mrs., just let me know, and that's fine, and working it. And it took a long time, and that's the other thing, understanding that this is not a quick fix. It takes a long time. I worked with that family for 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Got that child's attendance from 23% to 87%, which is still low. But I remember when she picked up her exam results, they were good results, and she went on to go to college, and that's where she is now. But it's not an easy road that you're about to tread, and it takes bravery to put yourself out there and say, maybe there's something wrong here, maybe we need some help here, maybe we can't fix this on our own. It's that whole ostrich in the sand, isn't it? Don't put your head down. Put your head up and look around, and be willing to say, maybe we need a conversation about this.
Absolutely. I think there's a couple of points in there about the ease with which parents can show their vulnerability to schools or school leadership, because sometimes school language can be quite rigid. We don't tolerate lateness. We don't tolerate, we expect you to come to school every way. The expectation, and parents might think, oh my God, it's my fault. And it's just, I'm just thinking how we can make parents brave who already may be worried about things. And I tend to find that there's more than one thing happening. So admitting there's a problem can become a problem in itself. How on earth do you find the words? What do you, at what point are you so desperate that you have to tell the school there's something going on? And how do you manage how that conversation is going to go? Because there's this, you will have heard of parent blame, and, parents can be quite defensive. I have met a parent, she's a lovely friend of mine, but she was actually banned from her son's school because she'd get so emotionally upset about things, which didn't help her at all. But, she was stopped from going in because she couldn't manage the emotional stress of it. And she was going through a divorce at the time. And that meant that there was a lot of pent up feeling, which then was unfortunately shared with the school staff. And obviously, no one wants to be spoken to in an unhelpful way in the course of doing their job. So it's a very delicate balance, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And I think we need to bear in mind as well, parents were students once as well. So they're carrying that with them. They're carrying the weight of their experiences at school, what they encountered, how they were treated, what the school system was like for them. And for a lot of them, they will have never stepped back into a school after that point until it's with their own children. And sometimes it's that whole, well, school, it must be like this because that's what I had. Or maybe they have a bad experience with their own child at one level, let's say primary school, and they carry that through into the next setting, and they feel like it's always going to be the same, or it's never going to be different. And I think we, as professionals, we always have to keep that in mind as well whenever we're having those conversations, and sometimes picking up on that and going, do you know what? Tell me what it was like when you were. Tell me what your experience of school was. And maybe we'll go and walk around the school together, and we'll go and look at what it's like now. I'm really sorry that you had that experience in that school or with that setting, but let's try and clean that slate, and let's try and start anew, and let's try and begin again and have a conversation about what we do now and what we do moving forward. And I think you get the same if you have a changeover of staff. It's really important. It's about relationship, isn't it? It comes back to how are we going to establish that relationship, and how are we going to create that level of comfort. And again, it's that opening up, it's that being personal to a stranger, essentially, that you are sitting there and you are talking about your private life with a stranger, in a building that is not familiar to you. And sometimes I find that asking them to write it down, or record it and send it as a voice note recording, can be really powerful, because they can do that at home in their own space, in their own time, and really think about it, and then they can share it with you. So having different ways of schools, of parents being able to communicate with a school on an issue, is so important as well.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing there is how you build trust, because this is big stuff, and to share your personal, I'm going through a divorce, I'm losing in the middle of losing my job, whatever it is, it's not going to be easy. You're kind of going into therapy territory there, aren't you? But if it means that it starts the process going, it's important to know that. The other thing you mentioned about was how long it takes, the process. Um, I'm really pleased to hear you say that, because therapeutically it can take, yeah, up to a year at least, from what I've seen, and you're saying up to 2 years, and that can be difficult for some school leaders to recognize, particularly if you're going into, we're in year 8, we've got options, we're in year 10, we've got exams, we've got mocks. And I've heard really lovely, well-meaning school leaders say, well, you know what, we went to see the parents, we've got a plan set up. Hopefully they'll be back, in a couple of weeks, six or 7 weeks. And I'm like, and I think realistically, to invest the time in a year or 2 years that can change the trajectory of a child's life
Mm-hmm.
is time well spent. And I think that alone, that message you've just given in how long that investment is in building the relationship, working with a young person, getting things set up and together, and incrementally boosting that attendance over time is music to my ears, actually.
And that's the key part that you said there, isn't it? Is that it's incremental over time. You're not going to go from, from 20% to 80% or 20% to 90%, but you are going to go from 20% to 35% and from 35% to 40%. And you are going to see that. And it's about having, that joined up plan, and go back to that joined up plan and go, what is working, what else what can we take away, because let's not try and do everything.
Complicate it, yes.
Scenario, what can we add into that, what's going to get us to the next stage?
Mm.
And when you are working with those complex cases, it can be a case of, do you know what, come downstairs. Next time I come and see you, you're going to come downstairs, and we're just going to sit in the kitchen. You don't need to speak to me. We're just going to sit in the kitchen. We're just going to be in the same space. Next time, I'm going to pull on the drive, and you're going to come out and meet me in at the car, and you're going to welcome me into your door. And it's that kind of thing. Do you know what? Next time, let's meet at a coffee shop, so that you've left the house and I've left school, but you're not in the same place. And it's that, and that.
Yeah.
You do it. Do you know what? Just come into the school car park, and I'll come and meet you at your car. And you're not. They haven't necessarily come through the door yet, but you've got those incremental little changes, and over time as well, you've built up that relationship, and you've created that trust that you talked about before as well.
Yeah. And I think that the time it takes and the time you have taken, sorry, to do that is wonderful. That is so joyous to hear. Um, to what extent do you think the pandemic influenced parents and children's approach to regular school attendance? And I know that it seems like a long time ago now, and things aren't quite back to normal. Although I'm not sure.
It's a new normal, I think. I think it's a new normal. I think we have to move away from blaming the pandemic, because when the children that were a lot of the children that were in school at that time are starting to move through and have gone through the system. So, the younger children that are coming through were not part of that pandemic, and in the next kind of 5 to 10 years we're going to see that completely shift and move on. But I think there is a legacy that has been left behind, and that legacy around, it comes back to the fixed penalty notice point, really, that a lot of what we gained from COVID was understanding the importance of being a family and being together as a family and looking after each other. And so I think what has retained there is that idea of the importance of family time, and therefore that feeds into why families are taking those term time holidays.
Yeah.
And we have seen that has gone up since COVID and has never come back down again. And there is a cost of living thing there. Since COVID, the cost of everything went up, and that plays a part in that as well. I think that we, as a country, we said health is more important than education, so we moved education down everybody's priority list mentally, and I think for some people it never went back up. A lot of there are some families that still blame schools for closing during the pandemic, even though it wasn't necessarily our choice. Well, schools were happy to close during the pandemic, and now they're saying that it's really important that they attend every day. They didn't care when it was the pandemic. But that is dying off a little bit, and that narrative is dying off. I think the relationship between schools and communities suffered in the pandemic, and that is taking a lot longer than I think we understand to rebuild. Schools were hubs of their communities. Lots of things happened in schools, around schools before the pandemic. Lots of clubs and activities would use school premises, and unfortunately, the pandemic killed the activities and the clubs off. And they never returned. So the school isn't being used in the same way that it once was. And so I think, there's been a shift in terms of how we perceive schools within communities. So it's not, we can't keep hanging our hat on COVID, and we can't keep hanging our hat on the pandemic. But I think there are some things that are still leftovers from time.
Interesting point. Interesting point. I mean, I think whilst we may have prioritised health over education, physical health, contagious, you know, conditions like an airborne virus, we are left with, in my opinion, the psychological issues of children, my son's cohort not having a prom, not having a GCSE event, or going to college and everyone wearing masks, sorry, and not actually being able to make friends with your fellow students. Or if you'd stayed in your school, well, you knew everyone, that was an advantage. But if you'd gone to college, making friends was a nightmare. And some of those formative and life skills of transition were completely messed up. And whilst you say, well, it's historic, I think psychologically that cohort will always have a kind of different emotional memory to others that may have gone before. And I think for me, it showed the importance of those traditions, the prom, and and recognizing if you're going to leave school and go to college, and recognizing that you've got some GCSEs, or you've got some BTECs or whatever. And it just showed me how important the transitions are as for development for young people, to understand things end, new things start, and this is how we mark them. But
Yeah.
to not have that thing here, just kind of like, and also even the way exams were marked. So it was like there were just loads and loads of his cohort that got like loads of fives when they felt they should have got sixes, and they didn't feel that the teachers had really bothered because everyone was just burnt out at that point. So I think we've learnt really how important doing things a certain way can be, particularly for young people. They expect us as adults to do things the right way.
I think what it did show as well is that importance of connection with your peers. Like you said, your son didn't have a prom. That was a rite of passage, but he
Mm,
didn't experience that with his peers. He didn't have that relationship kind of be tied up in a bow and be able to move on. And as well as that, we've seen mental health since the pandemic spike horrifically, and we haven't we don't have the resources, we don't have the response to that. And so we are still, as a society, as schools, dealing with that. And those young adults, as they are now, will go on to have families and to be the next generation of parents, and we all always need to be mindful of that as well.
absolutely, absolutely. Um, just on a technical note, can you explain for those that don't know what banded attendance is and how it works in supporting families?
Yeah, so before the pandemic, you would look at your attendance as a whole number and kind of say, well, it's at this figure or it's at this figure. But you never kind of broke that down into looking at what does that actually mean. And working in attendance before the pandemic and during the pandemic and afterwards, um, there was huge amounts of time that was spent looking at these headline figures, these big numbers, and then looking at groups like boys and girls and disadvantaged and send, but never actually kind of breaking that down any further. And it would take hours. And by banding, you are putting those numbers into smaller sections, smaller percentages. And by putting them into smaller percentages, you are dealing with smaller numbers of children. And when you do that, it allows you to focus and to be able to look at those individuals, but it also allows you to see that incremental gain. So you can see that child who is struggling with emotional based school avoidance, but has actually moved from one band to another. Whereas before COVID, what we would have done was we'd have gone, it's below that figure, that's not good enough.
Right,
Where
I see.
now we can say, do you know what? Yeah, okay, you are below that figure, but actually you've gone from here to here, and
Mm,
that's massive. And then let's talk about how we go from here to here, and let's look at how we make the next step up, because the evidence is showing that for every band that you move up, the effect that will have on your outcomes and your opportunities and your lifetime earnings is vast. A 5% difference can be an increase in income of over £700 across your lifetime. And you think that, I mean, an annual increase, by the way, of £700 across your lifetime. So that's tangible money for that child throughout their life as they become an adult, just by moving up a little bit, by changing their outcome a little bit, by showing that, do you know what, maybe things were hard, but showing to that college or showing to that employer, I found things hard, but I did something. I worked with my school, with my parents. I did something about it, and I moved from here to here, and I've progressed, and I'm dedicated, and I've got something to offer, and it shows self-esteem as well. And it's something that you can, yes, we can measure, yes, we can allow it to focus, yes, we can see results that way, but it can also change outcomes, and that's the key part.
That's amazing. And you're quite right. In a way, those attendance figures are quite a blunt tool, aren't they? I've worked with children, they got 34%. And as you say, 34 to 40 doesn't look like much because they're saying, well, it's still below our 55% threshold or whatever it is. So yeah, that would give a family, a child, huge incentive if you're working a bit, that things seem possible.
Yeah, it's the hope, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. That's really fantastic to have that explained so clearly. Um, which kind of leads me on to where does well-being and a nurture curriculum fit into the attendance story?
Yeah, so in my particular attendance story, when I was working on the banded approach before it became a national rollout, one of the things I found really informative is when I started to have conversations with these groups of children, is that they didn't understand what it meant, what attending was, why they needed to do it. And so at the same time, alongside having those conversations and having those action plans and those meetings with the families, we started to teach attendance, and we started to talk about how they felt in those scenarios, and what connect their own feelings with what that meant in reality in terms of what was happening to them and why they were making the decisions they were, but then also to actively look at how we could change that, and what would work for them. So it started to empower the students, and then we started to build the nurture from that. So we
Right.
use the information from the children to build the nurture. So where children were telling us that they this was a problem for them and this was the reason that they didn't attend on a Wednesday,
Right.
how
Yes.
to use that to become to create the nurture.
Yeah.
Uh,
So child-led nurture, basically.
yeah, it's child-led nurture, but also as well, their knowledge is power, isn't it? When a
Mm.
child understands why they've done something,
Mm.
they have knowledge then to understand that they can also do something else, or they can take a different avenue, or they can speak out, or they can ask, or they can look for support. And it's that mechanism to just open the door a little bit that allows the light in for them.
Mm. Fantastic, fantastic. So it's a whole program. I mean, I think in a way, although the pandemic was quite disruptive for education for the reasons we discussed, if anything, it's given us an opportunity to look at how we do things because it's impacted attendance so badly, and having an opportunity to sort of go back to the drawing board and say, okay, this isn't working. What can we do? How can we do it? Let's look at it fresh. And you've got your banded attendance, and you're looking at getting information from children. You're looking at building trust with parents. You're looking at getting information from young people. So you've now influenced and set a new standard. So, okay, here's some tools we can use that we know works. It's not just about, come in or else. We've actually really looked into this. We're really beginning to understand what it means for parents and most importantly for young people. So let's go. And I think, so in a way, something positive has come out of something really difficult. And it's not perfect by any means, but it's certainly given a lot of encouragement. And I feel encouraged knowing that you're there doing that, and that there's all these different techniques you can apply, and you are yet very realistic about how long it takes and what the investment is and what the skill set is in the people that are doing it and how they need to hang on to their humanity. So
Yeah, there's a package now, isn't there? It's not there's not a stick anymore. There's a package.
yes, exactly.
Yeah,
Let's put the sticks down, shall we? So before we wrap up, as a quick fire round for you, bit of fun after all that hard thinking. K-pop Demon Hunters or Scooby-Doo?
Oh, K-pop.
Nice. Twix or an apple?
Apple. I don't like chocolate.
Oh, okay. And watching Strictly on TV or going to a local Zumba class?
Oh God. Neither of those sound particularly appealing.
What would your choice be?
I mean, if it would either be, I mean, I do go to the gym, but it would be the gym or traitors for me, I think.
Oh, traitors. Okay, okay. Fair dude. Everyone's got their own little favorite sort of reality TV, comfort TV thing, haven't they?
We do. We all need a guilty pleasure, don't we?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I have loved chatting to you, Beth. I love how you're putting your energy in motion, your passion in motion. You're doing this. And I do get a sense that you absolutely love what you do. Um,
I adore it. I absolutely love what I do, 100%.
and that comes across. So you are putting your energy in motion and you've shared that with me today and then ultimately with whoever tunes in. And I think that passion will travel through the internet, the interweb, and inspire people to think about their own attendance issues and their kids' attendance issues and feel hopeful, I think.
Yeah, I think we want to build a community. That's what we want. We want a community around this,
Yeah,
every angle.
yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm in.
I
if you
love
you
that.
have me. Thank you so much for being on the Energy in Motion podcast, Beth Gibson MBE, and yeah, all your details are in the comments underneath. So people they can find you, they can email you, they can read more about what you've done. And thank you once again.
Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks very much.